There was altogether too much work to be done. A cross had to be lowered, the nails pulled out of the body. There are some 30-odd steps involved in burying a man under Jewish law, both then and today. It begins by very formally addressing him by his Hebrew name and that of his father, Yeshua ben David, Jesus the son of David. We ask your forgiveness for any indignity we may inflict upon your body in the process of preparing you for burial. It ends by kissing his lips with love. Somehow they get that out of Genesis 50. The work is done by women. In between, he is to be washed, shaven, his hair cut, his beard trimmed, his fingernails clipped and cleaned. You couldn't just wash him. You had to dig a pit, use a special washing board. You couldn't use cool water, let alone cold. It had to be warm, fragrant, aromatic, spiced. Ultimately, he would be anointed in fragrant spices and oils in liquid form, clothed and wrapped in a sheet. A tremendous amount of work. By now, considerably less than an hour in which to do it. Again, the women must have helped. The cross was lowered, the nails pulled out of the body. They did at least as much as they had to do to preserve it. They wrapped him in a sheet. Using the Greek, Matthew and Luke say that Jesus was folded into the cloth. This one was stretched out flat. He was laid on his back on half of it. The other half was brought over his head and draped over the front. If that's not folded, somebody tell me what it is. Mark said he was wrapped. I don't see any conflict. John said he was bound. This cloth was tied around the ankles, again around the waist, by cords probably made of rushes. He wound up being wrapped, folded, and bound into the cloth, all at the same time. No conflict. They laid him in a particular tomb. Matthew said it was Joe's own tomb. As far as I'm concerned, that's immaterial. Personally, I think they might have used Pilate's tomb if it was any closer, and they thought they could have gotten away with it, because they were moving. Nicodemus' contribution, 100 pounds Roman weight, 70 pounds our weight of myrrh and aloes. Why? It doesn't make any sense. It's ridiculous. It's contradictory. You see, the Jews have never mummified a body, ever. The Jews have never embalmed a body if they could possibly help it. The Jews have never used winding strips. Sorry, kids, that's Christian tradition. The Bible does not say that Jesus was buried like a mummy. John was quite emphatic. Jesus was buried according to the manner and the custom of the Jews. And all the Jews have ever done, then or today, when the law permitted it, was to put a man in a sheet and bury him before sundown the same day. There was an Orthodox rabbi back in Connecticut that told me they would be doing it there if the law permitted it. They want the body to go back to dust as rapidly as possible. So why myrrh and aloes? That's why we had to read the Talmud. We had to get facts. About two-thirds of the way through that collection of holy law, we came across a rather obscure little tractate called the Ebel Rabbathi, Jewish Burial Customs. This is almost verbatim. In ancient times, it was the custom to bury someone who had died of bowel trouble with spices and ointments placed next to the body. But because this was an embarrassment to the living, who were suffering from the same disease even while they lived, it became the custom, then afterwards it was enacted, it became law, to put spices and ointments next to the body of every dead person, so that there would never be any embarrassment to the living. All Nicodemus was doing was obeying his own law that called for spices and ointments to kill the smell of a decaying body. Several other references in the Talmud to the spices being used as a deodorant. If you wish to argue, think back to the story of Lazarus. He was a wealthy Jew. When he died, society people from Jerusalem came down to Bethany to help his sisters Mary and Martha mourn. Both accounts of the story clearly reveal that they loved their brother with a passion, and that they had the money and they had the desire to give their brother the best funeral that first century Israel could afford to give to anybody. If it really had been the custom to bury a man like a mummy, with 100 pounds of concrete or something in the folds, they'd have done it. But if they had, when Jesus stood outside that tomb and yelled, "Hey, Laz, come on out," look it up. Nobody went in and got him. Nobody carried him out. It says that although he was bound hand and foot, he sat up, stood up, and he walked out. And there's nobody in this room older than the preschoolers that would probably that would believe that a mummy can walk. You either have to be a small child or a horror story freak to buy that one. But in this game, you try anything. I did. Try getting out of bed tonight with your knees held together. You're going to find out that it doesn't work. A mummy can't sit up, he can't stand up, and he can't walk. But Lazarus did all those things. The only possible answer is that he must have been able to shuffle one foot in front of the other. He could only have been buried according to the manner and the custom of the Jews, in a sheet. We just never looked it up before. And when you get down to the bottom line, what difference does it make? Unless, of course, you happen to be trying to witness to a Jew in Jerusalem, and you tell them that Jesus was Jewish, and they buried him like an Egyptian. You know what happens? You get laughed at. I wonder how many Jews we've turned off over the centuries because we were too lazy to do our homework. That too says something, but I don't like it even a tiny little bit. Truth is the name of the game. The two old men rolled a stone across the face of the tomb. The Greek term, sportomegapetra, literally translated a very, 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 very great stone. Josh McDowell says a better translation is, hey, wow, man, get a load of that rock. That's not a bad translation either. But the Greek seems to indicate a stone weighing in excess of 1.5 tons. And it would be perfectly easy for two old men to do it, because Jewish burial tombs are nothing but caves, or holes dug into the side of a hill. A large stone will be placed above the entrance. If it's a wealthy tomb like the Garden Tomb, there might be something like a millstone rolling in a deep slot or a track. More often than not, it's just a big boulder. After the body's been interred, the men in the burial party put their back against it and start it rolling. Gravity drops it into place. But to open it would mean that you would have to roll at least 1.5 tons uphill with no power equipment. Those girls had an awfully good question on Sunday morning. There was absolutely nothing rhetorical about it. They meant it. Who's going to roll the stone away? It would have taken every man they knew in Jerusalem pushing together to do the job. The Codex Bezae may be the oldest piece of manuscript still in existence. It's in the Cambridge Library in England. It goes back to the first half of the 2nd century. The copier is obviously copying from a 1st century manuscript. In a gloss, that's a note in the margin that you can never copy off into the text. He says that the stone was of a size that 20 men pushing together could not have moved. There was no pebble. The girls had a good question. But a better question might have been, what were they doing there? If those good Jewish girls had actually been there on Friday night and they watched Jesus being buried, I think they helped. Why did they go home, waste their high holiday, their time, their money, purchasing more spices and ointments, preparing them, and now they're coming back to bury Jesus all over again? Hey, seriously, how many times do you bury a man in 3 days? It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It's contradictory. Unless possibly they had done on Friday night what I've done, and so has every one of you at some point. So there's no way we can finish this job tonight. We'll do what we can tonight and finish it in the morning. Or in this case, let's do what we have to preserve his body and get out of here while our heads are still on our shoulders. If we're still alive, we'll be back on Sunday. The Encyclopedia Judaica, printed in Jerusalem, 1972 edition, a good encyclopedia, the same thing as the Britannica or the Americana, under the heading of burial, says it's obvious only to the Jews. It's obvious from the account of the burial of Jesus of Nazareth that there was no time on Friday night in which to bury him according to the requirements of the law. The burial party apparently did only as much as they had to do to protect the body. They intended to give him a legal burial on Sunday. The Jews saw it. Very few, if any, Christians ever bothered to look. At this point, there's a gap in the historical record of the crucifixion. I never saw it before. I never heard anyone preach it. Got 3 out of 4 writers don't tell us what happened for the next 3 days. They end the story on Friday night with 2 old men rolling a big boulder. They drop the story and they don't pick it up again until Sunday, when the women are wondering how they're going to get past it. In between, there's nothing. Probably they didn't know. No one but Matthew gives us any indication at all of what could have happened. And nobody in the world but Matt could have written the 28th chapter of his book, because he turned out to have been a thief. He was a traitor. He was a man who had loved money more than he loved anything else in the world, including his own life. Matthew had been a tax collector. Well, over the years, back home, I've called tax collectors worse names than that, and I probably will again next week. But this one, it earned it. Israel then, and it usually was, a conquered nation. This time it was Rome that was grinding him under its heel. And Caesar was demanding his money. His method of collecting taxes? Supreme simplicity.